يوم نطوي السماء كطي السجل للكتب كما بدأنا أول خلق نعيده وعدا علينا إنا كنا فاعلين ولقد كتبنا في الزبور من بعد الذكر أن الأرض يرثها عبادي الصالحون إن في هذا لبلاغا لقوم عابدين وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين صدق الله العظيم.
And their followers and their families. Ameen. I'm your brother Sohaib Saeed. I'm a student from Scotland, which is part of the United Kingdom, studying here in the Faculty of Theology or Usul al-Din, just around the corner from this blessed mosque. And as you know, we have a number of presentations, so I'm going to try to keep mine as brief as possible. And the topic that I've been asked to speak about is the peaceful spread of Islam. I prefer to give the title speaking about something positive because, as our brother mentioned, one of the meanings of Islam is peace. And therefore it's a message of peace and it can only spread by peace. But as we know, there are people who make an allegation against Islam that it was spread by the sword. And by that they mean that Islam was spread through violent means, that Islam was spread by forcing people to embrace it and to believe in it. And of course, this is an allegation which we should ask a question at the beginning of any misconception. What is behind it? What is intended by this statement? Because those people who say that Islam was spread by the sword are not just speaking about an opinion about history, which of course we believe to be a wrong opinion, but rather they are trying to say, number one, that nobody would believe in Islam if it were not for being forced. Therefore, there's nothing good in Islam to be believed or followed. Secondly, they are saying that Islam is based upon immoral principles and says that you can force people to believe what they do not believe in their hearts. And thirdly, they are saying that Muslims, wherever they may be, and including in the modern times, want to dominate people, dominate the entire world through violence and destruction. So of course, because this is the background and this is the implication of what these people are saying, it's very important for us to address this misconception. And in doing that, I want to look at two key terms very briefly, to understand what we mean by da'wah, and number two, what we mean by jihad. Da'wah, as we've said on this slide, is inviting to the way of God or to the way of Allah with wise preaching and beautiful conduct. Now the fact is, Islam is a message of light and truth, and the light requires to spread throughout all places and all corners where there is darkness. And as our reciter beautifully recited at the beginning of this meeting, where the Quran says, addressing Muhammad, peace be upon him, the last messenger of God, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, peace be upon him, except as a mercy to all the worlds, not even just all the whole world, but all the worlds in the plural. Therefore, Islam is a message that is supposed to be spread, and Muslims do want to spread Islam to every person, every human being, male or female, old or young, wherever they may live. But that is done through mercy. We have not sent you except as a mercy for the worlds. Secondly, the word jihad. The word jihad is very commonly misunderstood and misrepresented both by non-Muslims and also at times by Muslims themselves. As you know, if you watch the news nowadays and see the way people are speaking about the concept of jihad. And we want to understand jihad according to the balanced, moderate, centrist perspective of Islam, which we are taught by our scholars here in the blessed Azhar Mosque and University, and of course, moderate and educated scholars from around the world. Jihad is a struggle. It is a struggle against injustice, oppression, and evil, whether that be internal to us as individuals or internal to our society, or whether it be external, when we face aggression or threat from outside. Jihad exists on different levels, as we've said, from the internal to the international. And it also exists in different means and different methods, whether that be jihad or struggle by our tongues, or by our pens, or by giving in charity, or whether that jihad be political, whether it be social or economic, or whether that jihad be combative, and that is where people meet each other on the battlefield or in the context of war. And that is the meaning that is most commonly understood or comes first to the mind when we use the word jihad, even though it encompasses all these different meanings. And people ask a question, why does Islam have a ruling of jihad? How can we say that it's a peaceful religion when it has this concept of jihad embedded within it and found throughout the Quran? To answer this, we would say that this is because Islam is a complete way of life. It is a realistic way of life which addresses all circumstances. And it would not be suitable for a complete way of life to assume that every place and every people are going to be peaceful with us. But rather, Islam legislated jihad in order to meet the realistic things that are in life. And secondly, it legislated jihad in order to provide rules and guidelines and limits for this struggle or for this combat, as it may often become. So we are asking the question, how are these two related? We have da'wah, which is the invitation, and we have jihad, which is the struggle, and at times may mean fighting as well. For some people, they would say they are related because jihad is the method of converting people to Islam. And this is the misconception that we are trying to answer today. We will talk briefly about the ethics of da'wah, the principles of da'wah. Da'wah or invitation to Islam has to be done with wisdom and with beautiful preaching and arguing in the best manner. And this is the teaching of the Quran in numerous verses, which we will not expand on for now. Secondly, that da'wah is not based upon compulsion or forcing anyone to agree. The Quran is very clear when it says, لا إكراه في الدين. There is no compulsion in religion. قد تبين الرشد من الغي. That truth has become clear from misguidance. That truth and guidance has become clear from deviation and misguidance. That is the reasoning behind there being no compulsion in religion, because truth is clear. When the truth is presented, then falsehood will vanish and disappear. And this verse that we mentioned is very important to emphasize, is one of the verses that was revealed in Medina in the latter part of the Prophet's mission, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And that's an answer to a wrong statement that was made by the Pope of the Vatican a few years ago, when he said this verse was one of the early verses in the Quran, and then other verses came which cancelled it out or abrogated it. This is false, and no scholar of Islam has ever said this. Rather, لا إكراه في الدين is in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is one of the Madani verses, or one of the surahs which was revealed in the latter part of the Prophet's mission, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And so we recognize that diversity of religions, that people differing and people not believing in Islam will always be a reality, and it cannot be wiped out, and people cannot be forced to change their religion. Rather, our task as Muslims, going back from the earliest days until today, is simply to convey the message, and to convey it with wisdom and with evidence, and we hope that people's hearts will open to that message. Then on the other side we have the ethics of jihad, and by jihad here we mean the combative part or the combative type of jihad. First of all, we should recognize that jihad is not something which is the first port of call. Rather, Islam loves peace in all its forms and detests war. Islam detests war. And there are many verses which we can mention. We will pick one or two. The verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 216. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Fighting has been prescribed for you, O Muslims, even though you dislike it. And also the fact that the 48th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Fath, begins by mentioning a peace treaty and describing it as a great victory. إِنَّا فَتَحْنَا لَكَ فَتْحًا مُبِينًا. That we have granted you, O Muhammad, a manifest and clear victory. And this is not in reference to a battle, but is in reference to a peace treaty. So we mention this just to show that Islam loves peace and chases after peace wherever it can be found, and detests war. For that reason, jihad is at most an inevitable lesser evil. It is a necessity at times. It is not desired or loved. Therefore, we don't agree with this expression that people use of holy war. Very often in the media, jihad is equated with holy war. But this is a term that is foreign to us. It does not come from the Arabic language in the first place. We don't say al-harbul muqaddasa. We say jihad. It's not the same as a holy war. And the purposes of jihad are defense of life, of honor, of land, of property. And as well as that, it is defense against aggression, which comes from outside, and is also in pursuit of freedom. People's freedom to live as they please and believe as they please. This is the message of jihad if we understand it and study it in detail. Also, as we know, there are many rules which apply to jihad, which mean that the people engaged in jihad observe the highest moral standards, not targeting non-combatants, women and children, or destroying property, animals and plants, and so on. So how are da'wah and jihad related? This is the answer that we've been trying to get to. We say that Islam is a call, it is a da'wah, that is protected by strength, and this strength is represented in jihad. Who is it protected from? It is protected from those tyrants and oppressors who would prevent the people, the ordinary people like you and me, from hearing the message of Islam and deciding for ourselves whether we will follow it and believe it or not. Therefore, jihad is the guarantee of religious freedom. This is the exact opposite of the claim that is being made. Jihad is in fact the guarantee of religious freedom. حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةٌ وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ لِلَّهِ. Until there is no more fitna, tumult and oppression, and the religion is for God, meaning that people are able to choose as they please. Speaking very briefly about the historical aspect, because we have talked about the theoretical teachings from the Quran, we should also look at history, and we will find that the Muslims were those who were oppressed, not the oppressors, starting from the time in Mecca till they had to flee to Medina. Then they had to defend themselves against the attacks that were coming from the Quraysh of Mecca, the polytheists who would not let them believe and practice as they wished to. And we see that in history there is no example of a population or even a single family or single person who was forced by the Muslims to embrace Islam. And those who claim otherwise should bring us the proof, and then we can examine it and respond as need be. The fact is that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world today. In fact, it is the fastest growing religion even in the West, and this is the figures that we hear from America and from Britain and elsewhere. And indeed, on a separate point, it is mostly women who are embracing Islam as well. So that answers another question about whether Islam oppresses women. And you can find the answer to these historical claims among the fair historians and among the books that is fair and balanced in treating this issue of the Muslims and their call and their da'wah and their jihad is the book of Sir Thomas Arnold, The Preaching of Islam. And many Muslim scholars also have recommended this book and what it discusses. The very simple conclusions that we want to make, and this is the final points, the only thing that can actually be spread by a sword is fear. A sword cannot spread any religion, whether it be Islam or any other. Violence only makes people fear and hate. So those people who would be forced by the Muslims to embrace Islam surely will not accept Islam, but instead will hate Islam. That is why this whole claim is based on an illusion. Secondly, we ask, when we look at this map, this is a map of modern day distribution of Muslim populations. The most populous Muslim country in the world today, the country with the highest number of Muslims, 200 million Muslims in this country, is Indonesia. No Muslim army ever went to Indonesia or to Southeast Asia in general, or went through Central Africa and Nigeria and so on. And even where there were Muslim armies that went, for example, into India, then we find that the army stayed in a particular region and didn't spread throughout the whole country. So how did Islam spread and how did people enter into Islam? It was not by the armies, rather it was by the good example of the people. And we know that it was traders and merchants who went from, for example, the south of Yemen and so on to the Southeast Asia. It was their good example. And also the example of the spiritual groups or the Sufi orders which brought people into Islam and made them and was appealing to them, so they accepted Islam of their own will. Indeed, since we are in Egypt, it's worthwhile to conclude with this point, that the very fact that there is a thriving Christian population in this country and in other countries around the Middle East, as well as ancient monuments that predate Islam, all of these things are enough proof that Muslims respect other people's belief and never impose their belief on any other. I thank you for your time and your patience, and we'll be very glad to welcome the next speaker. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.